In the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by verdant hills and a mist that never seems to lift, lies a lake that holds one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Its dark waters, stained by ancient peat, hide more than just rocks and fish. There, according to hundreds of witnesses over the centuries, glides a creature that defies everything we know about the natural world, an ancient presence that connects our present to Earth's most remote times. Hello, I'm Kaya, the legend teller. Today I'm taking you on an extraordinary journey through Scotland's most mysterious waters, where science and folklore meet in a fascinating dance. This is the story of the Loch Ness monster, or Nessie, as she's affectionately known, a legend that has spanned centuries and continues to challenge our understanding of the world. The wind cuts through the Scottish hills with a force that seems to carry voices from ancient times. When you arrive at Loch Ness for the first time, the first thing that strikes you isn't its size, even though it's 37 kilometers long and winds through the highlands. It's not even its depth, which plunges 226 meters into the bowels of the mountain. What truly captivates you is the silence, a silence that carries weight, a silence that seems to be waiting for something. The mist dances across the dark surface as if it knows secrets we don't, and perhaps it does. Because these waters have a history that began long before the first humans set foot on this land. When the glaciers retreated more than 10,000 years ago, they left behind not just a lake, they left a wound in the earth, a portal to depths sunlight has never touched. The color of these waters tells a story of its own. It's not blue like the lakes we know, but a deep, almost black brown, tinged by the ancient peat that flows from the mountains. Centuries upon centuries of decomposed organic matter, of leaves that fell when the Druids still walked these lands, of roots that grew when the Romans attempted to conquer these wild frontiers. This peat does more than color the water. It protects it, it hides it. Dive 10 feet and you're in complete darkness. Dive 20 feet and you're in a world where your own hands disappear in front of your face. It's a place where anything could exist, and you'd never know it. Local fishermen have a saying: the Ness doesn't give up its dead. They say bodies that fall into these waters rarely resurface. The peat preserves them, the pressure keeps them at the bottom, and the loch guards them like a guardian of its own secrets. Perhaps that's why, over the centuries, people began to suspect that if the loch could hide the dead, perhaps it could also hide the living. But our story doesn't begin with modern suspicions. It begins in 565 AD, when a man named Columba arrived on these shores, carrying more than just his Christian faith. He carried a determination to confront any force, natural or supernatural, that he encountered along the way. And that's exactly what happened. Saint Columba was no ordinary missionary. Tall, imposing, with a voice said to carry for miles, he had left Ireland not as a fugitive, but as a spiritual conqueror. His goal was clear: to establish the Christian faith in a land where the ancient gods still whispered through the stones and waters. When he reached the banks of the River Ness, which flows into the loch, Columba encountered a sight that stopped him in his tracks. A group of people gathered on the bank, and among them, the unmistakable sound of lamentation. Someone had died. The details, recorded by Columba's own biographer, Adamnan, some 100 years later, are so precise that you feel as if you were there. A local fisherman had waded into the water to retrieve a boat that had broken loose. Suddenly, something emerged from the depths, something enormous, something that shouldn't exist. The man screamed once before disappearing beneath the surface. When his body was finally recovered, people whispered about strange markings, about the expression of absolute terror frozen on his face. But the most disturbing thing wasn't what had happened. It was what people said they saw. An immense form had broken the surface of the water. A long neck, like the trunk of a young tree, yet flexible, snaking. A head too small for the size of the body that loomed beneath the water. And eyes. eyes that seemed ancient, intelligent, yet completely alien to the human experience. Columba listened to the reports in silence. For a man of faith, there were two possibilities. Either this was a creature of God who had lost his way in violent behavior, or it was something darker, a manifestation of the pagan forces he had come to combat. Whatever the truth, his answer was the same. "I'm going to cross the river," he announced. People tried to dissuade him. They offered boats, detours, any alternative that didn't involve entering those waters. But Columba had made his decision. He ordered one of his disciples, a young man named Lugnya Mokuming, to swim across the river to fetch a boat from the opposite bank. What happened next changed the way people thought about those waters forever. Lugnya had swum only a few meters when the water around him began to churn. They weren't waves, they were ripples with a pattern, as if something immense were moving just beneath the surface. People on the shore began shouting warnings, pointing to something approaching the young swimmer. That's when she appeared. The creature broke the surface with a force that sent waves crashing to the shore. Its neck rose from the water like a living mast, bending and twisting as its head turned directly toward Lugnya. Its mouth opened, not in a roar, but in a sound beyond human comprehension. A sound that seemed to come from a time when the world was young and other rules governed life on earth. It was at that moment that Saint Columba did something that would echo through the centuries. He raised his right hand, made the sign of the cross in the air, and in a voice that cut through the panic like a sword, he shouted, "Don't go on! Go back! Go back!" What happened next defied all expectations. The creature stopped. Its immense neck froze in mid-air for a moment that seemed eternal, and then, slowly, it began to retract. The head disappeared first, then the neck, and finally, with a final ripple of the surface, it vanished completely into the dark depths. Lugnya swam the rest of the way undisturbed. Adamnan's account of Saint Columba's encounter with the Loch Ness creature is considered the first written record of what would become one of the world's most enduring legends. But here, we begin to enter the fascinating territory, where history and folklore intertwine in ways that defy our modern need to separate fact from fiction. Adamnan was a learned, educated man, and his account of Saint Columba's life, Vita Columbae, was not a book of fantastical stories. It was a serious biography written to document the holiness and miracles of a man who had become a central figure in the Christianization of Scotland. For Adamnan to include this encounter in the text, he must have considered the event not only real, but significant enough to merit a place in official history. But what really happened in those waters in 565 AD? Some scholars suggest that Columba may have encountered a familiar but rare animal in the region, perhaps a gray seal that had traveled up the river Ness from the sea, an unusual but not impossible behavior. Gray seals can grow up to 3 meters long, and when they raise their heads from the water, especially from a distance, they can create a silhouette that vaguely resembles the classic description of the Loch monster. Others propose that the creature could have been a lost specimen of some small whale species, or even a dolphin that strayed into the river system. The River Ness connects the loch to the North Sea via the Moray Firth, and although rare, marine mammals occasionally venture upstream. But there is a third possibility, one that touches on the heart of Celtic culture at the time. For the native peoples of the region, Loch Ness was not just a body of water, it was a sacred place, inhabited by aquatic spirits they called kelpies, or ich uisje, meaning water horses. These creatures, according to tradition, could take many forms and were known to either help or punish humans, depending on how they were treated. It's possible that what Saint Columba faced wasn't just a physical creature, but a symbolic encounter between emerging Christianity and Scotland's ancient spiritual traditions. His victory over the creature represented not only personal courage, but also the triumph of the new faith over the old gods. What we know for sure is that after this encounter, the waters of Loch Ness acquired a reputation that would persist for the next 1,500 years. People began to whisper about something living in the depths, something best left alone. For centuries, the story lived primarily in the oral tradition of Scottish families. Parents told it to their children, grandparents whispered it to their grandchildren, and with each generation, new details were added, others were lost, but the core of the story remained. There was something in the lake, something ancient, something that didn't fit into the ordinary world. During the Middle Ages, chroniclers occasionally mentioned strange sightings at Loch Ness. In 1527, Duncan Campbell wrote of a terrible beast emerging from the waters to attack 3 men, leaving only one survivor to tell the tale. In 1780, a farmer named Donald Fraser swore he saw a creature the size of a horse with a serpent's head cross his property one rainy night. But it was the centuries of relative isolation that truly allowed the legend to grow and strengthen. Loch Ness lies in a remote region of the Highlands, accessible only by difficult trails that discouraged casual visitors. Local communities lived relatively secluded lives, where ancient stories were preserved with almost religious care. And then, at the beginning of the 20th century, everything changed. The year 1933 marks a watershed in the history of the Loch Ness monster. Not because the creature has changed, if indeed it exists, but because the modern world has finally reached the shores of those ancient waters. The construction of the A82 road, which for the first time in history offered a clear and accessible view along the entire length of the loch, was like opening a window that had remained closed for centuries. Suddenly, people who had never set foot in the Highlands could drive comfortably along Loch Ness, stop whenever they wanted, and gaze upon those mysterious waters. And that's exactly what John Mackay and his wife were doing on a sunny May afternoon when they became the first people to report a sighting of the monster in the modern era. Mackay was the manager of a hotel in Inverness and knew the area well. He wasn't an impressionable tourist or someone given to fantasies. When he stopped the car and pointed out to his wife something moving on the surface of the lake, they both watched for several minutes what they described as a huge body rolling and plunging in the water. Their account was published in the local newspaper, the Inverness Courier, on May 2, 1933. The article used the term monster to describe the creature for the first time, and the editor added a note asking others with similar experiences to contact the newspaper. The response was immediate and surprising. Letters began arriving not only from locals, but also from visitors who had had strange experiences at the lake over the years, but had never felt comfortable reporting them publicly. George Spicer wrote of seeing a creature resembling a dragon or prehistoric dinosaur cross the road in front of his car. Arthur Grant, a veterinary student, swore he nearly collided with a creature that leaped in front of his motorcycle one January night. But it was in April 1934 that the history of Loch Ness took on a completely new dimension. Robert Kenneth Wilson, a respected London gynecological surgeon, was vacationing in Scotland when he decided to stop at the lake to watch birds. According to his account, he had just set up his camera when he noticed ripples in the water about 200 meters from the shore. Something was rising from the surface. Wilson managed to snap 4 photos before the creature disappeared. When the film was developed, one of the images showed what appeared unmistakably to be a long, sinuous neck rising from the dark waters, topped by a small head, exactly as traditional descriptions of the monster suggest. The surgeon's photograph, as it became known, was published in the Daily Mail on April 21, 1934, and the impact was instantaneous and global. Newspapers around the world reprinted the image. Radio stations discussed the mystery. For the first time in history, the Loch Ness monster had a face. What followed was extraordinary. Scientific expeditions began arriving in the region. The first formal investigation was organized by the Zoological Society of London in 1934, using hydrophones to detect underwater sounds. They found no definitive evidence, but they did record some unexplained noises. In 1960, Tim Dinsdale, an aeronautical engineer, filmed what appeared to be a large object moving across the lake, leaving a V-shaped wake on the surface. The film was analyzed by the RAF's Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center, which concluded that it showed probably an animated object of considerable size. But perhaps the most ambitious expedition was that of Dr. Robert Raines in 1975. Using sophisticated sonar and underwater cameras, his team captured images that appeared to show parts of a large creature. What might be a fin, what might be a neck, what might be a head with eyes and a mouth. Raines's images were analyzed by photography experts, marine biologists, and even the FBI. Opinions were divided. Some saw clear evidence of an unknown creature. Others argued that the images were too vague to draw definitive conclusions, possibly showing pieces of wood, shadows, or artifacts from the camera itself. And then, in 1994, the surgeon photograph, the image that had captured the world's imagination for 60 years, was finally debunked. Christian Sperling was 90 years old when he finally decided to tell the truth. In 1994, 60 years after the publication of the famous surgeon's photograph, the elderly man called reporters and made a confession that shook the world of Loch Ness monster enthusiasts. The photograph was a fake, and he knew it because he had helped create it. The story Sperling told was both sobering and fascinating. His stepfather, Marmaduke Wetherell, was a fact hunter and adventurer who had been hired by the Daily Mail to find evidence of the monster. Wetherell had found some suspicious footprints on the lakeshore and photographed them. But when experts from the Natural History Museum in London examined the images, they discovered that the monster footprints had been made with a hippopotamus foot umbrella, the kind of decorative item common in Victorian homes. The Daily Mail not only rejected Wetherell's findings, but also publicly ridiculed him. Humiliated and furious, Wetherell decided to get revenge on the newspaper the only way he knew how, by creating a hoax so convincing it would make the Daily Mail look foolish. Sperling, who specialized in special effects and miniature models, built a fake creature using modeling clay and mounted it on a toy submarine. The monster was only 14 inches tall. They sailed to the middle of the lake on a calm morning, lowered the model into the water, took photographs, and then sank the evidence. But Wetherell was too clever to present the photos himself. His credibility was already compromised. Instead, he persuaded Robert Wilson, the respected London surgeon, to submit the images as a chance discovery during his vacation. Sperling's confession explained many of the inconsistencies researchers had noticed in the photograph over the years. Why the monster appeared so small in the image, why the surrounding waves were so small for a supposedly enormous creature, why Wilson had never tried to capitalize on his famous discovery. But here's the really interesting part. The revelation that the most famous photograph was a fake didn't kill interest in the Loch Ness monster. In fact, in some ways, it strengthened it. Because while one photograph had been debunked, hundreds of genuine sightings remained unexplained. Reputable people, with nothing to gain from lies, continued to report strange encounters at the loch. And modern technology was beginning to reveal that Loch Ness was an even more mysterious place than anyone had imagined. In 1987, Operation Deep Scan mobilized a flotilla of 24 sonar-equipped boats to conduct the most comprehensive mapping of the loch floor ever attempted. What they found was surprising. The bottom of Loch Ness was not smooth as expected, but full of caves, ledges, and complex rock formations. There were places where a large creature could easily hide from sonar, underwater tunnels connecting different parts of the loch, and depths that had not yet been fully explored. Even more intriguing, the sonars detected several anomalies, large moving objects that didn't behave like known fish or debris. One of these anomalies was tracked moving at 15 kilometers per hour at a depth of 180 meters, much faster and deeper than any known fish in the lake should be capable of. Adrian Shine, a leading Loch Ness researcher, described these anomalies as unidentified encounters. They weren't definitive evidence of a monster, but they were evidence that something was happening in the loch that science couldn't yet fully explain. And then in 2003, the BBC decided to do the definitive investigation. The 2003 BBC expedition was planned to be the final word on the Loch Ness monster. Using the most advanced sonar technology available at the time, 600 separate sonar beams that could detect football-sized objects anywhere in the loch, they conducted the most comprehensive search ever undertaken. For 2 weeks, sonar scanned every cubic inch of water in Loch Ness. If there were a large creature living in the lake, they would find it. The result was nothing. No large creatures were detected, no unexplained anomalies. The lake appeared to be empty of anything larger than a common fish. To many, this seemed like the final piece of evidence that the Loch Ness monster was purely a figment of human imagination. But science has a funny way of revealing surprises when we least expect them. In 2018, a professor at the University of Otago in New Zealand named Neil Gemmell proposed a completely different approach to investigating the mystery. Instead of searching for the creature directly, why not look for DNA evidence in the water? Every living thing, fish, birds, mammals, reptiles, constantly releases genetic material into the water through shed skin cells, saliva, urine, feces, and other bodily fluids. This technique, called environmental DNA or eDNA, revolutionized marine biology, allowing scientists to identify species in complex ecosystems without ever seeing them directly. If there were a population of large creatures living in Loch Ness, their DNA would be in the water. And with modern genetic sequencing techniques, Gemmell could identify not only whether there were unknown species in the loch, but exactly which species were present and in what numbers. Gemmell's team collected 259 water samples from different locations around the lake, at different depths and in different seasons. Back in the lab, they extracted all the DNA found in the water and compared it to global genetic databases to identify each species present. The results were fascinating and in some ways unexpected. The lake teemed with life. They found DNA from 3,000 different species: bacteria, aquatic plants, insects, fish, birds, and mammals. There were trout, salmon, eels, and lampreys. There was DNA from deer drinking from the shore, birds diving for fish, and even dogs swimming with their owners. But there was no DNA from large reptiles, no traces of marine dinosaurs, no evidence of plesiosaurs or any surviving prehistoric creature. If the monster was a giant reptile from ancient times, as many speculated, it should have left genetic traces in the water. What they found, however, was a surprisingly large amount of eel DNA. European eels are extraordinary creatures. They originate in the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic and migrate thousands of kilometers to grow in freshwater rivers and lakes throughout Europe. They can live for over 100 years and grow up to 2 meters long, although larger specimens have occasionally been reported. Gemmell suggested that the monster sightings could be explained by eels of unusual size. A 3 or 4 meter long eel swimming at the surface in ripples could easily be interpreted as the long neck of a larger creature. Eels also have a habit of moving sinuously, creating ripples on the surface that could suggest a large submerged body. But even this explanation had problems. 4 meter long eels would be exceptionally rare, and it's questionable whether they could survive in the cold waters of Loch Ness. Furthermore, many witnesses described seeing not only a long neck, but also a distinct head and body features that don't match those of eels. And then there are the land-based sightings, where people swore they saw the creature out of the water, crossing roads or moving across land between the lake and smaller bodies of water. Eels, while capable of surviving out of water for short periods, would hardly explain these reports. Science had provided some answers, but it had also created new questions. Even with all the modern technology, with sonars that can detect objects the size of a soccer ball and DNA analysis that identifies thousands of species, sightings of the Loch Ness monster continue. Not just from impressionable tourists or thrill seekers, but from locals, experienced guides, and even scientists who have come to study the lake for entirely different reasons. In 2020, Ian O'Faoda-Gain, a veteran Irish researcher monitoring Loch Ness webcams, captured images that intrigued even the most staunch skeptics. The footage showed something large moving beneath the water's surface, creating ripples and disturbances that didn't match the known patterns of fish, birds, or debris. Steve Feltham, who has dedicated more than 30 years of his life searching for evidence of the monster, living in a converted van on the lakeshore, offers a unique perspective. Feltham has examined thousands of sightings, separated obvious hoaxes from genuine reports, and developed sophisticated theories about what people might be seeing. The question isn't whether there's a monster, Feltham told me in a recent interview. The question is, what exactly are people seeing that makes them believe they've seen a monster? His favorite theory involves seals. Gray seals occasionally swim up the River Ness from the sea, especially during certain seasons when they follow schools of salmon. A large seal swimming at the surface can create a silhouette resembling a long neck. When it dives, it can appear as if a large creature is disappearing into the depths. But even Feltham admits that his seal theory doesn't explain all sightings, especially those involving multiple witnesses observing for prolonged periods. Dr. Charles Paxton of the University of St. Andrews conducted a fascinating statistical study of reported sightings. He found that sightings tend to increase during certain weather conditions, such as sunny days after rainy periods, when visibility is clear, but the water is still choppy from recent winds. This correlation suggests that at least some sightings can be explained by optical phenomena, reflections, waves, or floating objects seen under specific lighting conditions. But Paxton also discovered something intriguing. A small percentage of sightings don't correlate with any known variable: weather, time of day, season, or level of tourist activity. These anomalous sightings persist as statistical data that don't fit any explainable pattern. It's as if there are two different phenomena happening, Paxton explains. Most sightings can be explained by known environmental factors, but there is a small core of cases that seem genuinely unexplained. Perhaps the most intriguing testimony in recent years comes from an unexpected source: Gary Campbell himself, who maintains the official record of Loch Ness monster sightings. Campbell is a skeptic by nature. He dismisses about 90% of the reports he receives as cases of mistaken identity, obvious hoaxes, or fantasy. But in 2019, he became a witness himself. "I was taking my usual morning walk along the shore," Campbell recounts, "when I saw something that just didn't fit. It was too big to be a fish. It moved wrong to be a piece of driftwood, and it was clearly alive. I watched it for 15 minutes. As someone who has spent decades analyzing other people's accounts, I can say I finally understand why people get so frustrated when skeptics dismiss their experiences." Campbell's account is particularly significant because he had nothing to gain, indeed much to lose, by claiming to have seen something inexplicable. His credibility as a skeptical investigator depended on his objectivity, and by becoming a witness, he risked his professional reputation. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of modern sightings is how they are demographically distributed. Contrary to what one might expect, It's not primarily tourists or impressionable young people who report sightings. A 2021 study found that 60% of reports come from locals over 40, people who know the lake intimately and have little to gain from publicity. Margaret Monroe, who has lived in a house overlooking the lake for 73 years, has reported 6 sightings in her lifetime. People think we're fools, she told me, but when you live here, when you know every rock, every wave pattern, every behavior of the local animals, you know when something's not right. And something's definitely not right about this lake. These local voices carry a cultural weight that goes beyond scientific evidence. For many Highland families, the monster is not just a tourist attraction. It is part of their regional identity, a connection to ancestral traditions dating back to pre-Christian times. Today, in 2025, the Loch Ness monster occupies a unique space in human consciousness. Scientifically, there is no conclusive evidence of a large, unknown creature living in the loch. Culturally, however, the legend is more alive than ever. The Loch Ness Centre, an exhibition in Drumnadroshit, attracts over 500,000 visitors annually. The local economy largely revolves around Loch Ness tourism, themed hotels, sighting cruises, souvenir shops, and guided tours. It is estimated that Nessie contributes over $80 million annually to the Scottish economy, but the impact goes far beyond tourism. The monster has become a global icon, appearing in films, books, documentaries, and popular culture. More importantly, it represents something fundamental about human nature, our need for mystery, our resistance to the idea that everything in the world has already been discovered and catalogued. In 2024, a new expedition began using technology that didn't even exist when the first scientific searches were conducted. Autonomous underwater drones, equipped with high-definition cameras and advanced biological sensors, are mapping the lake in unprecedented detail. Artificial intelligence is being used to analyze movement patterns in the water that could indicate the presence of large creatures. The preliminary results are inconclusive. The same anomalies detected in previous expeditions keep appearing. Moving objects that don't behave like known fish, but also don't display definitive characteristics of a large, unknown creature. Dr. Adrian Shine, who has spent 4 decades studying the loch, offers a balanced perspective. Loch Ness has taught us a lot about investigating the unknown. Even if we never find a legendary creature, the process of searching for it has yielded important insights into aquatic biology, sonar technology, and eyewitness psychology. In a sense, the search for Nessie has become more valuable than finding Nessie ever could be. But for many, this pragmatic perspective misses the point. The monster was never really about biology or zoology. It was about mystery. It was about the possibility that our world, so mapped and catalogued, still held secrets. It was about the comforting idea that not everything can be explained, quantified, or controlled by modern science. And perhaps that's why, even in the face of decades of scientific research that have found no definitive evidence, people continue to believe. They continue to visit. They continue to hope. Because in the end, the Loch Ness monster transcended its own physical existence. It became a symbol of possibility, a guardian of mystery, in an age that sometimes seems to have lost its capacity for wonder. And speaking of mysteries that transcend simple explanations, I want to share something with you. Just as Loch Ness holds secrets in its murky depths, each of us carries inner mysteries that we rarely stop to explore. There's a book called The Forgotten Agreement, the 30-Day Challenge, that talks about invisible commitments we make to ourselves, agreements so ancient and profound that, like Nessie, they seem more myth than reality. But just as the dark waters of a lake hide truths that science is still trying to understand, our own inner nature holds pacts and promises we made in moments of clarity, but which ended up buried by the rush of everyday life. One of the most powerful chapters talks about the commitment no one sees, that silent agreement we made with our most authentic essence, our bravest version, our capacity for growth that sometimes seems as mythical as the monster in the lake itself. If you feel there is something dormant within you, something that deserves to be awakened and honored, perhaps it is time to dive into those inner waters and rediscover that forgotten agreement waiting to be fulfilled. The Loch Ness Monster teaches us something profound about human nature and our relationship with mystery. In a world where satellites map every inch of the Earth's surface, where the internet connects the most remote corners of the planet, where science seems to have an explanation for almost everything, there is still room, still a need for the unexplained. But the deeper lesson of this legend isn't about aquatic creatures or scientific evidence. It's about longing for ancient roots. It's about the feeling many of us carry that we've lost something essential along the path of modernization. When people look into the dark waters of Loch Ness and imagine an ancient creature swimming in the depths, they're not just looking for a monster. They're looking for a connection to something older than modern civilization, something that existed when the world was still young and full of unexplored possibilities. This longing for ancient roots manifests itself in many ways in our daily lives. It's the inexplicable nostalgia we feel when listening to a traditional song we've never heard before. It's the sense of familiarity when walking through an ancient forest. It's the impulse to preserve family traditions, even when we don't fully understand their meaning. It's the same feeling that makes us stop on the shores of a deep lake and feel that there is more going on there than meets the eye. The waters of Loch Ness are dark because they carry the memory of millennia. The peat that colors them is composed of generations and generations of life that flourished, died, and decomposed, creating layers of organic history dating back to the end of the last ice age. When we gaze into these waters, we are literally looking through 1,000 years of preserved history. Likewise, each of us carries inner waters colored by the experiences of our ancestors. Genetic memories, cultural traditions, intuitive wisdoms that we cannot explain rationally, but which we feel in our bones. These are our own dark waters, our own inner mysteries. The legend of Nessie persists because it touches on this fundamental human need to maintain connection with the ancestral, with the wild, with the unexplained. In an age where almost everything has been domesticated, catalogued, and explained, the Loch Monster represents the possibility that there are still forces in the world that do not bow to our need for control and understanding. But perhaps the deeper truth is this: the monster we seek in the outer waters actually lives in the inner waters. The ancient, powerful, mysterious creature we so desperately want to find isn't swimming in Loch Ness. It's swimming in the deep lakes of our own souls. When we long for our ancient roots, we're not nostalgic for a past we've lost. We're listening to the call of aspects of ourselves that are still alive, but dormant in the murky depths of our everyday consciousness. The true lesson of the Loch Ness Monster is this: what we seek outside ourselves is often waiting to be discovered within. The dark waters that fascinate us in the lakes outside are a reflection of the dark waters we carry within, full of mystery, ancestral memory, and unexplored possibilities. And just as the lake keeps its secrets in the depths protected by the darkness of the peat, our soul keeps its most precious treasures in the depths protected by the darkness of our own inner complexity. The monster exists. It may not be in the lake, but it certainly exists. And when we learn to dive courageously into our own dark waters, when we allow ourselves to explore the mysteries we carry within, we discover that we are much older, much more powerful, and much more connected to the roots of life than we ever imagined. If this journey through the mysterious waters of Loch Ness has piqued your curiosity about other legends that speak to the soul and connect with our deepest roots, you won't want to miss the next stories I have to share. Subscribe to the channel here and turn on the notification bell, because in the coming weeks, we'll delve into even more fascinating legends. stories of other ancient creatures, magical places around the world, and ancient traditions that still have much to teach us about who we truly are. There are so many mysteries waiting to be explored, so many deep waters for us to dive into together. Don't miss this journey. It's just beginning.